You've heard about those strange occurrences in elevators, those moments when the air grows colder, the lights flicker, or you think you hear a voice whispering just out of reach. But the stories you're about to hear will make you think twice before pressing that button for the next floor. Elevators are more than just a way to move between levels. They're gateways to places best left untouched. Tonight, 3 people stepped into the confines of a simple elevator, but they found themselves plunged into darkness they never could have imagined. They don't realize it, but they've just entered the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. My new apartment building was a relic from the 1960s with its cracked plaster, tarnished brass fixtures, and a vibe that felt more fitting for a black and white movie than modern living. It had charm, they said, but what really stood out was the elevator, a vintage contraption with a brass gate and an old wooden control panel. The kind where you could hear every rattle and clank as it made its slow ascent. Moving in, I found myself using it daily, marveling at its quirks. The way the gate screeched as it closed, the way it shuddered slightly before rising. At first it was quaint, a welcome change from the sanitized metal boxes I was used to. But after a few days, things started to feel off. One night, coming home late from work, I stepped into the elevator, feeling the familiar chill of the small enclosed space. As I pressed the button for the 6th floor, I glanced through the brass gate at the empty lobby. The door clanked shut, and the old motor groaned as the elevator began to rise. But then it stopped abruptly between the 3rd and 4th floors. I pressed the emergency button, but all it did was let out a shrill ring. I sighed and leaned back against the wooden paneling, waiting for it to start moving again. That's when I heard it. A soft humming, like someone singing an old, tuneless melody. It came from somewhere below me, echoing through the elevator shaft. "Hello?" I called out, hoping it was just a janitor or a maintenance worker. The humming stopped. A moment later, the elevator jolted back to life, resuming its climb. I shook off the unease, telling myself it was just an echo or a trick of the mind. But that night I dreamt of an old man in a dusty uniform standing inside the elevator, his fingers gnarled and bony as they hovered over the controls. The next morning, the dream seemed silly, just a manifestation of the stress from the move, I thought. But when I stepped back into the elevator, I noticed something strange. The buttons seemed different. There was one that hadn't been there before, a small, unmarked button between the 3rd and 4th floors. Curiosity got the better of me. I pressed it. The elevator jerked to a stop, the lights flickering as the doors slowly opened onto a narrow, dimly lit corridor that I had never seen before. It was cramped, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and framed black and white photos of people I didn't recognize. A cold draft swept in from the corridor, making me shiver. I stepped out cautiously, glancing back at the elevator, but the doors clanked shut behind me. Panic welled up in my chest. I pressed the button repeatedly, but the doors stayed closed. That's when I noticed one of the photographs on the wall. It was of an old man, standing in front of the very elevator I had just stepped out of, a grim smile on his face. His eyes seemed to follow me. A faint humming began to fill the corridor, the same tune I had heard the night before. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My skin prickled with dread as the humming grew louder, coming from right behind me. I turned and ran, slamming into the elevator doors and pounding on them. The lights in the hallway flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Finally, the elevator door creaked open, and I tumbled inside, jamming my finger against the button for my floor. As the elevator descended, I caught one last glimpse of the corridor, a shadowy figure standing at the end, smiling that same grim smile. The doors closed, and I fell back against the panel, gasping for breath. When I reached the 6th floor, I rushed to the lobby to tell the building manager what I'd seen. He listened with a puzzled expression and insisted that there was no unmarked button and no extra floors. But the next day, the old brass gate had been replaced with a new metal door, and the elevator was out of service for maintenance. I moved out a week later, but sometimes, in the silence of the night, I still hear that humming echoing in the back of my mind. I don't know who or what I encountered that night, but I'll never forget that chilling smile or the way those shadows moved just a little too close. The office building where I worked had an elevator notorious for being slow, a creaky, tired machine that took its time getting to each floor, as if it was reluctant to do its job. I'd gotten used to it, the way it always made you wait an extra beat or two, the way the lights flickered occasionally. One Friday evening, I worked late, well past sunset. By the time I shut down my computer, the office was a shadowy, deserted place, and the only sounds were the hum of the vending machine and the distant murmur of traffic outside. I grabbed my coat and headed for the elevator, eager to start my weekend. When the elevator doors finally slid open, I stepped inside, pressing the button for the ground floor. But before the doors could close, a hand shot out and a man stepped in, a janitor from the looks of it, wearing a stained uniform and carrying a mop. He nodded at me without a word, then leaned against the back wall as the doors shut. I nodded back, but something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he avoided eye contact, or the way his smile seemed a little too wide, too fixed. The elevator began its descent, and I stared at the numbers above the door, counting each floor as it passed. But then the numbers froze at floor 7. The elevator lurched, stopping suddenly. The lights dimmed, and I felt my pulse quicken. I glanced at the janitor, expecting him to do something, but he just kept smiling, his eyes fixed on the closed doors. "Looks like we're stuck," I muttered, trying to keep my voice calm. He didn't respond, just kept smiling. His teeth were yellowed, cracked. There was something deeply wrong with the way he was standing, too stiff, too unnatural. I reached for the emergency button, but his hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength.
"You don't need to do that,"
he said softly, finally meeting my eyes. His gaze was dark, bottomless, like staring into a void. My heart thudded in my chest as I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. The lights flickered again, and for a split second I thought I saw another face behind him, something skeletal grinning with hollow eye sockets. I yanked my hand free, stumbling back against the wall. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The janitor's smile widened, stretching too far across his face.
"Just here to clean up the mess,"
he whispered. Suddenly the elevator jerked, the lights going out completely. I was plunged into darkness, the air turning cold and heavy. I felt something brush past me, a sensation like cold fingers trailing down my arm. I pressed myself against the corner, trying to keep track of the janitor, but he had disappeared into the shadows. The elevator began to move again, but instead of going down, it was going up, past floor 7, then 8, 9, 10. It kept climbing, the air growing colder with each passing second. I hit the buttons frantically, but they did nothing. I could hear a low, rasping breath just inches from my ear, as if someone was leaning in close. Finally, with a shuddering jolt, the elevator came to a stop. The door slid open, revealing a pitch-black hallway that I knew didn't exist in the building's floor plan. I could see nothing beyond, just darkness that seemed to pulse and breathe. A hand pushed me forward, almost gently. I stumbled out, turning back just in time to see the janitor's face grinning out at me from the darkness of the elevator. His eyes were gone, hollow black pits, and his smile stretched unnaturally wide. Then the doors slammed shut, and the elevator plummeted, leaving me alone in the dark. I ran blindly down the hallway, feeling my way along the walls until my hand hit another elevator button. I pressed it desperately, and after what felt like an eternity, a different elevator arrived. Its modern lights blinding after the pitch-black darkness. It took me to the lobby, and I fled the building, leaving my job behind without a second thought. To this day, I never found out what happened to that old elevator, or what it was that rode with me that night. But when I close my eyes, I can still see that smile, and I can still hear the soft, rasping breath of the thing that lurked in the shadows. My best friend Mark always loved urban exploration. Old hospitals, abandoned schools, you name it, he'd been there. So when he told me about the derelict hotel downtown, I should have known it would lead to trouble. It had been abandoned for decades, a fire gutting the upper floors, but Mark was convinced there was something special inside. He wouldn't shut up about the old ballroom or the rumor of a haunted elevator that supposedly led to a floor that shouldn't exist. We broke in one stormy night, squeezing through a broken window. The hotel lobby was a cavernous space, filled with shattered chandeliers and faded red carpet that reeked of mold. The elevator stood in the corner, its brass doors tarnished but intact. Mark made a beeline for it, dragging me along. "It's just an elevator, dude," I muttered, but he flashed me a grin and hit the button for the top floor. The elevator creaked to life, shuddering as it started its ascent. The ride up was slow, the air growing colder as we climbed. We reached the 7th floor, the highest floor listed, but Mark hit the button again. The elevator shuddered and jerked, then continued upward, past floors that didn't exist. The panel flickered, the numbers scrambling, and then, with a final lurch, the elevator stopped. The doors opened onto a floor that looked untouched by time. The carpets were plush, the chandeliers unbroken, but the air was thick with the scent of smoke. A figure stood at the end of the hallway, facing away from us. A woman in a faded red dress, her hair loose and wild. Mark stepped forward, but I grabbed his arm, the sense of wrongness thick in the air. The woman turned slowly, her face hidden by shadows. And then she moved towards us, gliding silently over the carpet. I yanked Mark back into the elevator, slamming the close button repeatedly. The doors shut just as she reached us, and we heard a soft tap on the metal as if she was knocking to be let in. The elevator plunged downward, the lights flickering wildly. As we descended, I thought I saw her again, reflected in the elevator's mirrored walls, standing behind us, her mouth twisted into a scream that never made a sound. I closed my eyes, praying it was a trick of the light. The elevator jerked to a stop, throwing us to the floor. When the doors opened, we were back in the lobby, but it looked different, dustier, older. We stumbled out, but when I glanced back, I saw the numbers on the elevator panel blinking erratically. Mark never spoke about that night again, and we drifted apart soon after. But sometimes I catch glimpses of that woman's face in reflections, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream, as if she's trapped just beyond the glass. I don't know where that elevator took us, but I know one thing for sure. Some doors should never be opened, and some floors are better left unexplored. 3 stories. 3 reasons to take the stairs next time. I hope you've enjoyed this little journey into the shadows, because in the darkness there are places where even the light of an elevator's button can't reach. If you've got a story that's even more terrifying, send it over and maybe we'll share it next time. This is Mr. Scary Guy saying, good night, sleep tight if you dare. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe by clicking the icon above. We've also got a playlist full of scary stories on your left side, and a suggested video you'll love on the right. Choose one and keep the scares going.